welcome to Commander Central episode 140, and today we'll be taking a look at Patreon supporter Zach Renke's Maelstrom Wanderer deck. I'm Dana.
And I'm Max.
Max, welcome back to Commander Central. How are you doing this weekend?
I am here. It is Sunday. I am here.
You have survived the weekend and ready to go back to work on Monday.
Sure.
Even though the show's airing on Thursday.
Yes.
I didn't get much accomplished this weekend, and I was A-okay with that.
Same here.
I did have to work on Saturday night late, but it was mostly just me having to be there. It wasn't too mentally taxing, but it did keep me and you from going to GP Indy and missing out on the festivities there, so that was kind of a bummer.
Yeah, that is a bummer, but maybe next year.
Definitely try to make that next year for sure. And as many GPs as we can possibly go to next year. Excuse me, Magic Fest. Chris isn't here to correct us, although I guess he corrects us the other way, doesn't he? He always calls them GPs.
Yes.
He had a weekend. We have not talked to him and heard his results, but I know he did keep messaging us about people he was playing games with, so he got some Commander in at least.
That's awesome to hear, and I'm glad someone was there to play Commander with everybody.
You know, did he get a chance to bust out any of your decks?
I have not gotten a chance to ask that yet.
Okay, we'll have to catch up with him on the show that airs on Monday and see how that all went.
Yes.
You got a few games in on, I think, Saturday. Is that correct?
I did. I met a couple friends at the shop and cranked out a bunch of, just played 1v1 for a little bit with our multiplayer Commander decks, and then sat down for a couple 4-player pods later in the evening. Anything
fun or interesting happen there?
My decks that I have right now, Regna and Krav and Brago, are the only two I kept because Chris took the other two with me. They like 1v1. They can really hold their own.
That's funny how, that doesn't surprise me from those two decks in particular. They seem like they would be good 1v1.
Yep. I lost a 4-player pod to a Cranko Mob Boss deck.
Quickly, I would guess. That tends to pop off.
Yeah, it was like turn 8, but it ended up with me. I was playing Regna and Krav, and I had a Soul Warden out, and the guy just said, I'm going to make 100 goblins. You can gain 100 life.
And you're like, oh no, that's number one. You're like, that's good, but on the other hand, if he doesn't care about that, that's not good.
Yeah, we eventually lost to an Outpost Siege on dragons and a goblin sharpshooter.
Oh, fun. Okay, that's cool.
Yeah, so double damage essentially, and then he could untap and tap Cranko as much as he wants to keep refueling his board. So he beat me to finding my Aetherflux Reservoir, so he ended up taking that game.
Nice. Cool. Have you done any more work on your what deck was it, the one that you were going to convert over from the rotisserie draft?
Yeah, so I played Anafenza a couple times this weekend just because I still have it, and it's fun. For a deck that has no ramp, it's just draw a card, play a card.
So it's still in the stock version that you were playing at, the rotisserie draft version? Very
much so, but that will slowly start to get converted over to Morphon humans.
Oh, nice. Okay. I was actually looking at Morphon Phoenixes to see how doable that was.
And it's not?
Man, it could be. You could make the deck if you were so inclined. Because, number one, then part of the problem with Phoenixes is literally they're all red. There's one from Alara that has a 4-color activated ability. So essentially it makes it a 5-color one. So you could even run that if you went with Morphon. But literally every other one is mono red. So, you could go mono red with just some other random commander, but Morphon actually gives you some other abilities and it would let you splash, say, green for overruns or something. But then I'm like, well, then you're just running basically a bad dragon deck. Or you could, I thought I could do black of some sort and take advantage of them coming back from the graveyard. But then you're running a bad version of a reassembling skeleton deck or your Regnant Krav deck. So I didn't look at it too hard, but in just glancing at it for 15, 20 minutes, I'm like, there's just no way to make it work right now that isn't just a terrible version of a better deck.
There you go. Hey, maybe that's okay though.
Maybe. I think I have enough terrible versions of better decks already. I don't know if I need another one.
That's fair.
So we have a couple of contests, I think, that are in full swing here we probably should mention.
Yeah, so for Twitter this month, we are giving away those 5 rubber wristbands from GP Vegas with all the planeswalkers from Core 20, I believe?
Core 20, yep.
Yep, okay, so Commander 19, Core 20. I'll get it straight one of these days. So we'll be giving those away. Just follow us and retweet that tweet when you see it pop up, and you'll be entered to win And then for our Patreon supporters this month, we are giving away a Ultimate Guard playmat. It has some mountain art on it for those red mages out there. So if you support us or continue to support us by the end of the month at patreon.com/CMDRCentral, you'll get entered to win that.
Yes, indeed. And you can also find us on the interwebs if you want to look us up and say hi. You can send us an email at cmdrcentral@gmail.com. We are easy to find on the YouTubes at youtube/cmdrcentral. And you can find us at cmdrcentral.com if you are so inclined to do that.
Booyah.
We also have some t-shirts available on Teespring if you want to see either Max or Chris take a pie to the face.
Yeah, so go to teespring.com and search CMDR Central and buy those Scumbag Unite t-shirts so I can win.
Have you checked to see what the tallies are, who's ahead between you two currently?
Nah, I think I'll wait until the end of the month. We'll do an end of the month recap of
do a recap? Yep. That makes sense. Yeah, that way you can encourage people to continue onwards or come from behind. Last I had checked, you were ahead.
I'm pretty sure I still am.
All right, good for you. I won't say that when Chris is here because I have to be impartial, but since he's not, go Max.
Yay.
So should we do a deck tech?
Let's do it.
All right. So one quick note we're going to mention here. This was a discussion we had offline about the Tashar deck we looked at last week. And that was like a really tightly tuned list, as we mentioned. And I think in the future, if we get decks that are that tightly tuned, we're probably going to do the tech a little bit differently and do it more like a show and tell kind of thing, where we'll just go over the cards and talk about the combos and interactions and how they work versus like trying to find suggestions. Because for a deck that's that completely edited and tweaked and just lean, it's so tough to find suggestions. So I think we'd be better served, and the listeners would be better served with us just kind of going over how it works versus like trying to find things for it. So if you are a Patreon supporter and you have a deck tech coming down the road, don't feel like you can't send us one that's, your favorite deck that you've already got in pretty tuned shape. We will just kind of handle that from a different angle if that's what you've got going on.
Yeah.
So we're looking at Zachary Renke's Maelstrom Wanderer deck here. In terms of playgroup meta, he generally plays among a significant size group in a shop, either for league nights or for free games afterwards. There are lots of decks with a variety of power levels. For his deck building, he prefers to basically tweak the deck as high as he can take the general. So if the general is capable of being really, really strong, he'll make the deck really, really strong. He doesn't want to intrude too much on other players, however, so there's limited counter spells, no mass land destruction, that kind of thing. But interaction is high overall, so he's willing to stop you from doing something, but he doesn't want to keep your deck from playing, basically. For Maelstrom itself, it'll be one of the faster decks in the shop, but because of some of the inconsistencies built into the deck, its power level is a little bit reduced, and play patterns are pretty variable.
He says the goal of the deck is to ramp into Maelstrom and cascade again. Pretty much we're going to turn creatures sideways and find another way to recast Maelstrom. The deck does best with some sort of enabler card that digs deeper into the deck than Maelstrom can, such as Savala Stampede or Genesis Storm. Other cards that I have looked into to build into have haste or ETB are attack triggers for the deck.
The deck's weaknesses within the deck are really just the high casting cost of Maelstrom Wanderer and some of the other cards that he's planning on cascading into with Maelstrom Wanderer, and that's generally a problem you see with this kind of commander overall anyway. You want to take advantage of the free spells, so you want to have high-cost free spells that get you the most value, but that kind of then tends to make the overall deck be filled with high-cost spells. There's a dense amount of ramp within the deck, but 8 mana can be challenging at times to get to, and casting 6 and 7 drops can be slow without ramping it out. The deck also lacks some overall consistency. Some cards are incredibly powerful, but they can't be tutored, so you just sometimes whiff on a cascade as well.
In terms of financial restrictions on the upgrades, there's really no cost limitation. He's just looking for some fun cards to either enable Maelstrom or payoffs that he may have omitted. There are a few cards that he's looking to replace for one reason or another. Within the list would be something like Mind's Dilation that could come out, or Recurring Insight, and Cavalier of Gales. He would prefer not to add any more extra turn spells, as one is enough, and no mass land destruction like he said earlier in his notes. He also runs Blood Moon, and before we say that he's running Blood Moon with only 10 basics, he only needs 1 basic of each to continue to cast Maelstrom, and so it's worked well in the past so far.
And finally, he may be looking to replace Field of the Dead for the bounce your commander to hand land, which is Sanctum of Eternity.
Yep.
And I would definitely recommend that. He hopes that was helpful, and if you have any specific suggestions, let him know. So we will do that as well. It's his pet deck, and it's performed quite well overall. It's become somewhat of a boogeyman in the shop for general speed and how it demands responses from the table. So let's take a look at this deck. He mentioned the CMC was quite high, and it is. It's average CMC of 4.06. The peaks, meaning the most cards in the deck, are 2 drops, but there's a ton of stuff in the 4 to 6 range, which makes sense in this deck. But if you're not casting stuff off Maelstrom Wanderer, that can be a pretty big ask when you're trying to just, drop 5 and 6 mana spells on your turn.
Right.
So let's take a look at his land base first of all. It's a full suite of basically, like, if you were to craft a perfect mana base for this deck, this would basically be it. There's all 3 ABUR duels. There's the shock lands you would want to run here. There's the on-color fetches as well as some off-color fetches here. There's the Ancient Tomb. There's the Horizon lands from the new set. There's Keswick Wolf Run to give you a little bit of extra gas when you come swinging through with Maelstrom Wanderer or something else that has haste. There's even a Cavern of Souls that's, I'm assuming, going to be set to elementals most of the time just to protect Maelstrom Wanderer. I mean, Scavenger Grounds to deal with problem stuff in a graveyard. A couple land removal lands, Wasteland and Strip Mine. This is, I think, just the exact land base for the most part you'd build with this deck.
Yeah, I 100% agree, and the idea of cutting Field of the Dead for Sanctum of Eternity means you could just decide to run all snow-covered basics or non-snow-covered basics, just because right now he does have a mix of snow-covered and non-snow-covered to get that different land name count up as fast as he can.
And I agree with that, with like replacing Field of the Dead with Sanctum of Eternity. I feel that's cool, and this is a deck where you're going to get some value off it, but you're going to get some value off it. Being able to bounce your commander and recast it is going to win you games at times.
Yeah, for sure. I do have a couple suggestions.
Sure.
Sanctum of Eternity was obviously brought up by him, but I think Command Beacon is a card you generally see in Maelstrom decks because he does cost so much mana to cast, and be able to crack the Command Beacon to get it back into your hand and cast it for its normal CMC seems really good in this deck.
Yes, that was one of my 2 other suggestions beyond Sanctum of Eternity. The last one that's a maybe that I considered is Darksteel Citadel, just because the one Planeswalker that we'll talk about next is Tezzeret the Seeker. Most of the time, I'm going to guess Tezzeret is going to be used for untapping artifacts, basically as a way to ramp. But his -X is fairly useful to go grab something like a Mana Crypt or even a Mana Vault. Maybe the option to do it for 0 to go grab a land sometimes is worth it, but I don't think you're going to have to go that deep. I think most of the time there's going to be artifacts worth untapping or a Mana Crypt or Vault to go grab. So I don't think that's probably worth it here, but it's something I thought I would mention as a possibility.
Yeah. My only recommendation would be maybe Teleria West, just to be able to transmute it to go get a land you need to fix, or grabbing that Mana Crypt out of your deck since you can transmute for it.
That's a good point. I didn't really think of that, but yeah, that can go grab your Mana Crypt. It can also go grab that Keswick Wolf Run, and in this deck, there's probably times when that is also a KO on somebody.
Yes.
And you can go grab the Sanctum of Eternity to use that to bounce your commander back to your hand.
Yeah.
No, that's a good call. I didn't really think of that but when you mentioned it, I just see like 3 or 4 good possibilities all of a sudden. That would be one I would consider here as well. Good call. So we mentioned the Planeswalker. Might as well touch on it quickly because there's only one of them, and that's Tezzeret the Seeker. And his +1 lets you untap 2 artifacts. That's why he's in the deck, I would assume. There's just not enough artifacts to use his -5 to swing with them, and it's not. There's a Mana Crypt and a Vault and a Divining Top. None of them have a high enough. They become 5/5 artifact creatures, I guess, but there's just not enough of them to have that be a thing, really. So he's basically using this like people use Garruk Wildspeaker.
Yeah.
You use him to untap 2 lands for the ramp. In this case, he's untapping hopefully one of the multiple artifacts that tap for more than 1 mana. Thran Dynamo taps for 3. You've got Soul Ring. You've got Mana Vault, Mana Crypt, and Grim Monolith. And it's probably pretty useful to have the option to untap that Grim Monolith and that Vault without having to pay the cost in them as well.
Very true.
So it's just a gas card here.
Yep. My only other recommendation for this deck would be Kiora Behemoth Beckoner. It's the new uncommon Kiora from War. Her static says whenever a creature with power 4 or greater enters the battlefield, draw a card. And then her -1 is like Tezzeret, untap target permanent. You get to untap all those mana rocks. Maybe if you put some creatures in here that have tap abilities, stuff like that. It just seems like a good way to even maybe give something pseudo-vigilance as well.
Sure, that would make sense. I do think Tezzeret for sure is logical here, and I would keep him in the deck, though, definitely.
Oh, yeah. I'm not saying take him out. I'm just saying maybe find a spot for Kiora.
So we mentioned those artifacts. We might as well just slide over there next, since we already covered most of them. You want to give us the list here, Max?
Yeah, so we have Grim Monolith, Mana Crypt, Mana Vault, Scroll Rack, Sensei's Divining Top, Soul Ring, Talisman of Creativity, Talisman of Curiosity, Talisman of Impulse, and Thran Dynamo.
That's a pretty solid collection. They're almost all mana rocks, although Scroll Rack and Divining Top let you mess with the top of your library some for Maelstrom Wanderer. It's, aside from basically Mox Diamond and Mox Opal, it's the CEDH suite of mana rocks for the most part. I guess there's no Chrome Mox here either, but those mana rocks all make sense. I don't think he runs enough artifacts to justify Mox Opal. I mean, Mox Diamond is obviously, every deck is going to be better with Mox Diamond. I mean, it is. But, I don't think this deck needs that necessarily. I think it's a really, really solid deck. If you happen to have one or can get a good price in one, obviously run it if you're playing in that competitive a meta. But I wouldn't, go seek one out necessarily for this particular deck.
Yeah. I think I totally agree. I think this artifact package is perfect for what he needs it to do. I really have no recommendations for changes except for maybe Arcane Signet when it comes out next month.
Yeah, because that can tap for any of the color manas you need.
Yep.
That would be really good for sure.
I could see it replacing one of the talismans.
Yeah. The only other one I thought about here was Crystal Shard. Artifact out of Dark Steel, I think it was, 3 mana, and you can spend 3 and tap it, or spend a blue and tap it to return target creature to its owner's hand, unless its controller pays 1.
Yeah.
So it's one more way to bounce Maelstrom Wanderer to your hand, but the ability to bounce someone else's creature, unless they have 1 mana free, is not irrelevant. There's been plenty of times when I've seen that in someone else's, not even Maelstrom Wanderer deck, just some other deck that has an ETB and a commander and the person's running it. And I know they're running it for their commander, but I'm also in a position where now I'm basically short 1 mana every turn, because if I tap out, they will just bounce one of my things. So that's the ability to hit other people's stuff makes it a deceptively useful card. And it's doubly so in this deck where you're going to get double cascade triggers off your commander for spending 1 blue mana to tap it and bounce it back to your hand. I think the value you generate here off the commander would make me try to find a slot for that, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. It's one of those just kind of includes in a Maelstrom deck, in my opinion.
Yeah, and maybe he played it for a while. I guess we didn't ask. Maybe Zach was running it for a while and found it to be too clumsy, or I don't know. So that could well be, because it is a pretty frequently seen card in Maelstrom Wanderer.
Yeah.
But whenever I've seen someone run it, it's an absolute pain to deal with. So I would guess it would be here as well.
Yeah.
Enchantments. We can go over those next. There's 5 of them in this deck. There's the previous mentioned Blood Moon. There's a Food Chain, which combos pretty nicely with Maelstrom Wanderer. There's Mind's Dilation, which we mentioned before. There's Sylvan Library, and there's Treachery. Blood Moon. I know he said it hasn't been a problem, and it, I would assume that's true. Man, that seems like it's gonna be a card that's just dead in your hand though too often.
Yeah, it's either gonna be dead in your hand, or you really need to find a way to get something like Food Chain out, so you can sacrifice all your stuff to gain mana on top of all the other mountains you might have.
Yeah, and he's right. Like, you do only need 2 other colors. I mean, because Blood Moon will make the mountain for you, so he only really needs to have one of his other 2 basics out, a forest and island. He'll get there, because there isn't like double or triple cost. It's just one of each pip and Maelstrom Wanderer's casting cost. So that part makes sense. I just feel like, man, you're probably you're gonna get burned by it, but maybe not.
Yeah, I definitely think it turns off the important lands. It turns off Kessig Wolfrun. It turns off a win condition there. It can turn off Sanctum of Eternity. So the lands you want to play that kind of motivate your general to do better, this shuts down. But if it is a powerful meta or a large meta where you don't know what you're walking into each pod, I get just having it to have it in your deck. And guess what? If you choose to cast it, you don't. Well, okay, you don't. I mean, you do cascade into it.
Well, right, that's the problem too. You cascade them, you don't have a choice, and it could come out at a bad time.
You may cast
it. That's true. That's true. I guess you don't have to cast it. That's true.
So I guess it is one of those things where do you cast it or not? And if you do, cool. But it's definitely up to him when it comes out to maybe lock out the game for a win or something. And
there are definitely, I don't doubt it. There are times when this comes down and you're in a position where you can just generate so much value, and your opponents aren't. Like, it's just going to lock them out of the game long enough for you to. Your value that you've accrued is just going to put you so far ahead. So I completely see that. It's just like visually in my head, 3-color deck and Blood Moon just seems such a contradiction.
Right.
So Mind's Dilation is one he mentioned, and I'll read that because it's a couple years old at this point. It's an enchantment, 5 blue, so 7 total. Whenever an opponent casts his or her first spell each turn, that player exiles the top card of his or her library. If it's a non-land card, you may cast it without paying its mana cost. So it's a pretty good card to hit off a Cascade because you just get a 7 mana, effect into play for nothing. But if you don't Cascade, it feels like a terrible card to draw, I think.
Yeah, the fact that it doesn't do anything right away is slightly bothersome to me in this type of deck. Where, at least if you cascade into your creatures or even some of the other instants or sorceries in the deck, they're doing something. This has to stay on the battlefield, and anything can happen between the time it hits there and you pass your turn.
Now, it does one thing nice about it. Whenever an opponent casts his or her first spell each turn, so like if you are playing in a meta with a ton of, blue for counters or just a ton of like instant speed interaction, you might get a lot of extra value off this because if people are doing things on other players' turns, you're getting cards in addition to when they do things on their turn. So like I can visualize situations where, like in my Talran deck, I'm oftentimes, casting instant on other players' turns to draw cards and stuff, and this puts me in a position where I want to stack those up on my turn to prevent you from getting free cards off me. So I can see situations where that's really, really, really effective. I can also see situations where you draw it and just go, I don't want to cast this right now, so I have a dead card in my hand. And I think that's going to be most times when you draw it. You're not going to want to cast it. You're going to have better things to do for 7 mana.
Yeah, I 100% agree.
So what do you think you would put? Like, I feel like Crystal Shard is perfectly legit to replace Mind's Dilation with. But if he's already ran Crystal Shard and just doesn't love the effect, I'd be happy just drawing some cards in that slot, whether it's a Harmonize or whether it's a Chart a Course or, anything basically. Like I feel like that's something I would almost prefer to have in that slot right there is just some raw card draw.
Okay, yeah, I can get behind that. I was thinking more of the haste enablers because granted Maelstrom gives stuff haste, but if you can't cast Maelstrom Wanderer, right, and you're dropping these 6 drops with no haste, something like Rhythm of the Wild would be great in this deck because it makes your creatures not be countered. And so that protects Maelstrom. And
it does stack with Maelstrom. Like if Maelstrom's out and it giving stuff haste already, then you can just fall back on the Riot ability and put a +1 counter on stuff.
And it can still attack. So now you're dropping, 6 power creatures for free off of that Cascade or something like that.
Yeah, I could see that.
Similar to Mind's Dilation, Stolen Strategies does something similar. At the beginning of your upkeep, exile the top card of all your opponent's libraries, and you may cast them this turn if you want.
And that can get a crazy amount of value.
It can.
And it's much easier to cast and get into play than Dilation, but you don't get any effect till next turn, basically, off it either.
Yes.
One other one I kind of liked here a little bit was Cream of the Crop, maybe. It's an enchantment from Lorwyn, green and colorless. So it's easy to cast if you have to. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may look at the top X cards of your library, where X is that creature's power. And if you do, put one of those cards on top of your library and the rest on the bottom in any order. So when Maelstrom Wanderer comes into play, it lets you dig down 7 deep and set up the top of your library. If you're planning on getting another trigger down the road off bouncing Maelstrom Wanderer, or do you just want to draw something that's gas next turn, it gives you the option to do that. So now the downside of this one is the same problem I had when I ran it in my Recce deck, because it's a cast trigger on Maelstrom Wanderer, just like Recce's card draw ability. You won't get the Cream of the Crop trigger until you've already done your 2 Cascades. So you'll have to wait till the next time you do it. But still, setting up 7 deep for your next card draw is, I think, really, really useful. And it is on ETB, so it's also going to trigger whenever the additional creatures that may come into play off Maelstrom Wanderer's Cascade ability as well.
Oh, yeah. Yep. Okay, so that makes sense. That's a great idea.
So, like, if you cast Maelstrom Wanderer and then, hit an Avenger of Zendikar or something, or hit a Dracuseth, I mean, you're going to be digging down like 15 cards, if not more sometimes, to set up whatever that next top deck is. That's going to really tear through your library to find like that one game-winning thing you want to find. Mm-hmm. So that's a card I think I would like to see here. It's a card I think doesn't get played enough in general, but I think this is a really sweet spot for it. All right, what should we look at next, Max?
Should we move over to sorceries?
Let's do it.
So we have 10 sorceries. We have Bribery, Farseek, Genesis Storm, Nature's Lore, Recurring Insight, Search for Tomorrow, Sylvala's Stampede, Skyshroud Claim, 3 Visits, and Tooth and Nail. Genesis Storm is interesting. This was from last year's Commander set, I believe.
Yes.
So it's 4 green, and it says when you cast a spell, copy it for each time you've cast your commander from the command zone this game. Reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a non-land permanent card. You may put that card onto the battlefield, then put all cards revealed this way that weren't put on the battlefield on the bottom of your library in a random order. So it's that Maelstrom effect, essentially, for 1 less mana.
Yeah. So it's a backup to the commander and synergizes pretty well with it. I don't think I've ever seen this cast in a game.
I don't think I've seen any of the Storm cards cast.
Man, I think I saw the black one at one point in time, and it didn't do all that much. They are much better in partner decks because you get the trigger
for each.
Yeah, but this is a deck too where you're casting the commander pretty frequently, so it does make sense here. I don't know if I love it, but I can see why it makes sense in this deck.
I see why it makes sense. I'm just trying to figure out how many times do you have to cast Maelstrom from the command zone to make this card beneficial?
Yes.
Like, you don't do it if you've only cast Maelstrom once. That's just 6 mana to get something.
Yeah.
But if the idea is you want to be able to bounce Maelstrom back to your hand a lot so you don't have to pay the command tax, I think this card could eventually be replaced.
Yeah, I could see that. There is a good bit of ramp in here. Farseek, Nature's Lore, Skyshroud Claim, 3 Visits, Search for Tomorrow. I like all of those. One of the cards he mentioned here. What do you think of the ramp package, first of all, here?
I don't like Search for Tomorrow. For those who don't know, it's 2 and a green for sorcery. Search your library for a basic land card and put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library, but you can suspend it with 2 counters on it for a single green. So, I mean, it's a cool turn 1 play, I guess, if you have a green source and this in your hand. But 3 mana to put something out of a basic onto the battlefield untapped seems expensive in my book, when you could run Cultivate or Kodama's Reach to get 1 to your hand and 1 on the battlefield.
Or even Rampant Growth for 2. It's also a card I don't have a ton of experience with. I do get the logic where, like, you're trading. It's better in the first 2 or 3 turns, and then it's worse every turn after that. And if you're playing a really, really aggressive deck, maybe you only care about it being good in those first 2 or 3 turns, and after that it's irrelevant. Mm-hmm. So like I buy that logic. The 3 mana is also a little bit less important if you're going to hit it off of the Cascade swing. So I also kind of don't love it, but I can see the logic behind it.
I do too. I think there's enough ramp in this deck between the artifacts and the spell speed, these sorcery ramps, where it could probably get cut for a different type of tutor, like Fabricate.
I mean, I'd be very tempted to replace that with the Arcane Signet when it came out.
Yeah, that too.
Because it's just always going to give you whatever color you need consistently for 2 mana every time.
Yeah.
So that's one I would probably be considering in that slot for sure.
Yeah.
Recurring Insight.
Ooh. You love this card.
I love it, but also like I recognize that 6 mana is a whole lot for that card, and I've gotten burned plenty of times when it's turn 13 and 2 people are dead and it's me and 1 person who's holding 2 cards in hand. It feels terrible then. And then I go, so I think of that, and then I think, yeah, but also if you hit that off Maelstrom Wanderer, you get a pretty nice card with a nice rebound for free because it's going to be cascaded into. And then I come back to, well, you can't be just running a ton of 7 and 8 drops hoping that they'll be cascaded into. Like at some point you're going to draw that. So I don't know. I think at this point I would lean into just probably running a more consistent, cheaper draw spell. Like I think I'd rather have Harmonize.
Yeah, 4 mana, draw 3. Sounds good to me.
Or Rishkar's Expertise, which a lot of times in this deck is going to draw you 7 off Maelstrom Wanderer or more. There's a ton of beater creatures in here, and it'll let you put something big into play for free.
Yeah, I mean, he has He has at least 20 things in this deck that cost less than 5 mana.
Yeah.
Or 5 mana or less.
But there's also a bunch in that 4 or 5 slot, as we mentioned earlier. So it's not just there's stuff underneath it, but there's also stuff that's a good value underneath it. Like you don't want to be casting, 1 or 2 drops off that trigger. You want to be trying to put 5 drops in play, and there's a lot of them in this deck.
Yeah. I do think Fabricate should be considered, though, especially with needing these mana rocks pretty bad in this deck. And not a lot of baked-in natural draw. It's just a way to guarantee you get your Grim Monolith or Mana Vault early in the game versus cascading into it.
I have a maybe suggestion for that we can get to next when we talk about instants. So I have one that might be better than Fabricate, and move on to the instants now.
Okay.
There's 8 instants in this deck. There's Chaos Warp, Cryptic Command, Cyclonic Rift, Evacuation, Mystic Confluence, Mystical Tutor, Nexus of Fate, and Worldly Tutor. So there's a removal spell in Chaos Warp. You have a Cryptic Command, which is a counter spell. It does a few other things, but it lets you bounce your commander.
What are they, Dana? What are the 4 modes of Cryptic Command?
You can counter spell. You can bounce a permanent to its owner's hand. You can tap all creatures a player controls, and you can draw a card. Is that correct?
You are pretty dang close.
Okay.
Counter target spell, return target permanent to its owner's hands, tap all creatures your opponents control, and draw a card.
Okay.
So yes, I'll give you an A.
Yay!
Because Chris would have made you do it.
He would have. He also makes you do them in order that they're printed on the card.
Because that's how it resolves.
Which I never remember. Rift, obviously, is Rift. Evacuation, I was going to initially say I would rather just have a board wipe like Blasphemous Act, but it does reset Maelstrom Wanderer, so I guess I get that here. Mystic Confluence is just a solid card, and you have a couple of tutors, Mystical and Worldly Tutor, that set up your Cascade triggers at instant speed nonetheless, so I think that's really, really useful. And Nexus of Fate, instant speed, nice to hit off a Cascade, but it also gives you an extra turn pretty quickly, and then goes back into your library where you can hit it again.
Exactly. The being shuffled back in no matter what is so good in this stack.
So even though Cryptic Command gives you the option to reset Maelstrom Wanderer by bouncing into your hand, I do not like... Well, I don't love the card in general. Trip blue in a 3-color deck, I do not like at all.
Yeah, I get why it's in here.
I do too, because like the versatility to bounce Maelstrom Wanderer makes complete sense. But man, I feel like even in a great land base, Trip blue is a really, really big ask. Particularly one that you're probably going to want to save at instant speed. So that means that like it's one thing if it's like triple mana and it's a sorcery speed, so like it's just going to be the spell you cast for the turn and that's it. In this case, it's a spell you're going to want to keep up mana for, and that's going to really limit what you can do on your turn if you want to leave 3 blue mana free. So like then you're in a position where like, okay, I'm going to leave Cryptic Command mana open, and I think you're going to feel like you have to use it then. And maybe you always do to bounce Maelstrom Water, so maybe that isn't a big deal, but I don't know. I feel like there's just a lot of variables there that I don't love.
I totally agree with you. I think what kind of makes me think this is okay in this deck is Food Chain. Being able to sack any of your 4-drop or higher creatures to cast Cryptic Command seems fine in my book.
I mean, if you have it out, yes.
Right. I mean, it's very use case scenario there, but I think it gets easier knowing you have ways to make lots of mana of a single color with Food Chain.
I think if the wording on the bounce component didn't let you hit your own stuff, if it was just your opponent's stuff, which I would wager in most other decks, that's what it gets used for. So most players don't even probably care, but like I think if you didn't have the option to hit Maelstrom Wanderer in this deck, I absolutely wouldn't want it. Whereas I kind of only don't want it because it does have that option. So I don't think it's terrible, but I myself would be much more comfortable just running a counter spell that was super easy to cast consistently, like Arcane Denial or Delay or even maybe Swan Song.
Fair enough.
I did have a suggestion here. You mentioned it before for the Fabricate, and that spell would be Long-Term Plans. It's an old instant speed spell. And basically it's 3 mana, a blue and 2 that lets you in blue at instant speed search up any card, and you don't have to reveal it, which is really unusual. And you put it third from the top. So you can get a thing you need and you can cascade into that thing you need. I think the versatility of that in this deck, I think it's a pretty good card anyway. I think going down, basically it's going to be only 2 because you're going to cast end of turn and then draw a card immediately, so then it's only 2 down. But you're going to almost guarantee, you're going to guarantee you're going to hit it off Maelstrom Wanderer if you're going to cast it then the following turn.
Yeah.
So I like that one a lot in this particular deck. I think it should be in more decks, probably in general. I think it's a really underplayed card. This is a perfect deck for it, and I would definitely consider that if you wanted one more tutor in here.
Okay. I have one suggestion.
Yeah.
And that would be Release to the Wind. Release to the Wind is a 3 mana, 2 and a blue instant from Rivals of Ixalan.
Okay.
It says, exile target non-land permanent. For as long as that card remains exiled, its owner may cast it without paying its mana cost.
Oh, that's perfect for this deck.
Yeah, so you can do your Maelstrom stuff, exile it, don't put it in the command zone, and recast it.
And you're just recasting it too.
Yeah, you get to recast it. As long as you don't put it in the command zone, you're fine.
What's the mana cost on that?
2 and a blue.
Oh, that's really, really good.
Like I might put this in a couple of my decks just because it's a way to protect something.
Well, and the problem with Maelstrom Wanderer is you can't blink it because it's a caster and an ETB trigger.
Exactly.
That works around this perfectly, though. Oh, that's a really good suggestion. Yeah, I like that one a lot. Chaos Warp, I love Chaos Warp, but I think it's not as good of a removal spell, generally speaking, as Beast Within. I think the amount of times a beast causes you a problem is less than the amount of times they hit something even worse off a Chaos Warp. It doesn't happen that often, but like I've seen someone flip over an Elish Norn off Chaos Warp and it just is miserable. Whereas the beast is almost never an issue. I think the reason Chaos Warp is probably in here over Beast Within is that Blood Moon, because you can still cast Chaos Warp with a Blood Moon out, and it's going to be trickier to cast Beast Within.
Yeah, I bet that is the reason.
If that isn't the reason, I think I would most of the time much rather have a Beast Within as my removal spell. Not that I don't love Chaos Warp, because I do. I'd be really tempted to run both, but given the choice, if that isn't the thinking, I would prefer Beast Within.
Yeah, my one argument would be Chaos Warp. Yes, you can worry about getting something worse on the field, but if he plays in a strong meta like it sounds he does, there's probably good odds he just hits, his opponents just end up hitting instants or sorceries, which do nothing off of Chaos Warp.
Yeah.
But I do agree the argument that just giving him a beast and getting rid of the problem permanently is probably the smarter move.
And you know what? I meant to mention this for the Cryptic Command thing too. The other thing with Cryptic Command, it does have modes that actually do something if you hit it off of Cascade. Yeah. So like if you run a cheap counter spell like Arcane Denial or something, it doesn't do you any good if you cascade into it. Whereas Cryptic Command, if you cascade into it, you could still go, well, okay, I'll just draw a card and bounce a thing. So yep. I should have mentioned that before. There is one more reason to have that in the deck, despite the casting cost. That's because it's just never dead off a Cascade. So that makes sense. Same with Mystic Confluence here.
Yeah.
All right. Those are the instants. That's going to leave creatures, I think, right?
Yep. We have 29 creatures. Ooh. That's
pretty deep.
Yeah. So we'll go through them quick and then talk about some specific ones, I think.
Okay.
So we have Avenger Zendikar, Balefire Dragon, Cavalier of the Gales, Clever Impersonator, Combat Celebrant, Consecrated Sphinx, Dockside Extortionist, Drakasith, Maw of Flames, Atali Primal Storm, Eternal Witness, Frost Titan, Gilded Drake, Glenalendra Archmage, Goreclaw Terror of Kalsima. Yeah, I said that wrong. Green Warden of Marasa, Heartless Hidezuku, Kikijiki Mirrorbreaker, Momir Vig Simic Visionary, Oracle Modiah, Palinkron, Pathbreaker Ibex, Phyrexian Metamorph, Prime Speaker Vanifar, Reclamation Sage, Scourge of the Throne, Shardless Agent, Sun Quan Lord of Wu, Teferi Mage of Zephyr, and Venzer Shaper Savant. Whew.
So it's a plethora of just good value creatures, many of whom have some kind of an ETB ability or at the very least an attack trigger of some sort.
Yes.
So you're going to either get something off them when they cascade in, or because Wanderer is out, presumably, and they have haste, you're going to get something off that immediate attack trigger.
Yeah.
So any ones here you want to jump out, and there's a lot of them, one of which he mentioned that he wasn't wild about was maybe Cavalier of Gales.
Yeah, so that came from Core 20. It's 2 blue for a 5/5 flyer. When it enters the battlefield, draw 3 cards and put 2 cards from your hand on top of your library in any order. So that's a cool way to set up your cascades for next turn, if you want to cast Maelstrom after that. And then when Cavalier Gales dies, shuffle it into its owner's library, then scry 2. So you get another more card selection, if it does die. So it's a reusable. I like that. The triple blue's not fun, though.
Myself, I think I would rather just run something basic like Prime Speaker Zagana for 1 more mana and just have her draw me, like, if you cascade into it, you're drawing 7. But, like, plenty often, you're going to have maybe even something larger. Like, there's so many big beaters here. Very rarely is that not going to be a full grip of cards you're going to draw, and you're just going to get them every single time. And it's, it costs 1 more, but it's not trip blue, so that's maybe a wash in terms of difficulty to cast. So like there's a few things like that I think I might rather have than Cavalier Gales that probably do a similar thing just a little bit better.
Yeah. Prime Speaker Zagana was on my list as well. I actually hadn't written down maybe that versus Prime Speaker Vanifar. Mainly because Prime Speaker Vanifar has that you need to know what you're going to go get problem. Yes. And I don't know if I feel comfortable sacrificing, a 5/5 flyer that costs 6 mana to go get a 7-drop. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And luckily she does, because of the haste on Maelstrom Wanderer, you can use her ability right away when she comes into play. So that offsets a lot of the problem with that card where you don't have to wait. You can usually use her. And I guess I haven't went through, I didn't see any of the obvious pod chains here, but I'm by no means an expert. I don't know if there's a game-winning pod chain to get to something here. I didn't see one. So, and there's also not a lot of like real low drops here. So you're going to have to hope that you can go from 5 to 6 to 7
quickly.
Yeah. I don't think it's a bad card. And I think maybe I would guess the person playing with it knows a little bit better, but I think there's things you can get that are probably going to generate you more value more consistently than Vanifar in this particular deck.
Yeah, for sure.
A card that has always been a colossal pain whenever I've seen anyone play it is Nezahal Primal Tide. Just we had one in the shop as a commander for a while, and Ixalan's a couple of years back now, so I'll quickly read it. It can't be countered. You have no maximum hand size, which those probably aren't that relevant because you're hoping to cast it off Cascade, but I guess it's still a cast trigger, so it can be countered.
Yep.
Whenever an opponent casts a non-creature spell, draw a card, and you can discard 3 cards and bounce it. Return to the battlefield tapped on its own to control at the beginning of the next end step. So you can exile it to save it. That's probably less relevant too, but like that's a Consecrated Sphinx level draw engine, and it's on a 7/7 body as well.
That protects itself.
That protects itself too. Like it's a super, super annoying card that you maybe don't realize how annoying it is until it's across the table from you.
Yeah.
So that's another one of those ones I think I would much rather have in that lineup than Cavalier of Gales. Any other ones here that you don't maybe like that much?
Yeah, give me... So, I really don't like Prime Speaker Vannifar. I just talked about that. I also think, like, Reclamation Sage is fine in this deck just because there's not a lot of graveyard recursion and you need... Reclamation Sage just gets rid of problems. I'm fine with that.
Okay, yeah.
Was there an Eternal Witness? There is. There it is.
There's an Ewit here for sure. Yep.
It's a way to get Maelstrom back if you let it go to the graveyard, I guess.
Yeah.
But without really a way to abuse it unless you can bounce it a lot, which there isn't that much to do unless you put in, like, Crystal Shard. It's hard to abuse it in this deck, and we've said that before in the past. If you can't really abuse it, maybe the one use isn't worth it. Yeah,
same thing with Frost Titan. I don't love Frost Titan. I think maybe here you're looking at when it comes into play, you tap a thing that doesn't untap, but mostly you're tapping a thing so Wanderer can swing in, probably.
Yeah.
So I guess I get that, but I still feel like I would rather, draw a fistful of cards off Prime Speaker or Zagana or even Consecrated Sphinx, something along those lines. Like there's, I guess there's Sphinx in here, but I would rather just do something that consistently every turn gives me a ridiculous amount of value than, well, hopefully you only have one thing that I can tap down and then get through for damage. Because if you have 2 things, that ability is way less useful if your opponent has 2 things out. I think it's not consistently a beater enough to justify that slot in a deck full of things that are absolute beaters.
Yeah. I'm not a big fan of Gilded Drake in this deck either. 2 mana to cast it and exchange control of it with another opponent's creature. But if this is your turn 2 play and there's no other creatures out, you have to sacrifice it.
Yeah, Gilded Drake's a great card, but it's also a little bit deceptive. It's one of those things where, like, I've thought about putting in decks before where I'm like, well, my CMC is kind of high. Gilded Drake's a really good creature for 2 mana, so it's going to make my curve look lower, and I can, not be running all these 4 or 5 drops. Except for you don't want to cast it usually in those first 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 turns.
Right.
So, it's still that, like, it's not bad on turn 8 or something when you cast Maelstrom Wanderer and have ramp mana left to also cast Gilded Drake. It's the 2 mana lets you sneak something in. That's not bad. It's just so unpredictable. I don't like, and to a degree, that's kind of the problem with things like Bribery. I'm not going to say don't run Bribery, but like myself personally, I don't like cards where I can't kind of predict what's going to happen. I've drawn Bribery in decks before where there's no good target. I've drawn Gilded Drake before where there's no really good target out there.
Yeah.
So that feels bad. And I guess maybe if you know your play group really well, what person's deck is going to go have that huge, 3 or 4 powerhouse creatures. You're going to find one of them. But like I've cast Briberies before that have absolutely whiffed. I've gone through their library and been like, I don't want any of these. I didn't know they were running all elves. I don't want any of these elves. Like I've done that before. And so it's kind of the same problem here with that Gilded Drake. I just don't like spells that you can draw particularly on turn 10. I hate drawing a spell on turn 10 and I'm like, there's nothing in play right now that I want to take. So, I don't think it's bad either, but it's not the kind of thing I would run. I would run something that I know has a guaranteed payoff every single time.
Yep. I have some notes on some other includes that might just be good in the deck.
Okay.
So first would be Surrak Dragonclaw. That's the Teamer Surrak. He makes your creatures not be able to be countered and gives all your creatures trample. So it's on top of the haste. Now you can punch through
Yeah.
and maybe not have to worry about bouncing blockers or tapping them down with Cryptic Command. You already mentioned Prime Speaker Zagana. I think Beast Whisperer would be great in this deck. It's a draw engine. He's already running almost 30 creatures, 30 counting Maelstrom. When something enters the battlefield, draw a card. That just seems really good. And then like God Eternal Ronus, just to give everything +X, and Vigilance until end of turn.
And it's tough to get rid of, and this is a deck where if someone's going to try, and it's going to go back into that library, and you're going to recast it for free off of a Maelstrom Wanderer, and then it's going to have haste along with all the other stuff that you just buffed up, including Maelstrom Wanderer. That's a really good one. By the same token, I think Ilarg, the Raised Boar, is a decent card here. I think you hit that off of Maelstrom Wanderer, it's going to come in, immediately have haste, immediately it'll swing in, and then let you put another big creature from your hand into play for free, swinging in as well. I think there are times when that's going to be so much value coming down that no one's ready for. Like, people are going to be watching Maelstrom Wanderer to see if you can cast it, but like, they're not going to be prepared for the additional gas that Ilarg comes down with. And same as the God Eternals, if it gets killed, it just goes back into your library 3 from the top, where you're going to hit it again off the next Cascade trigger. So that's one that I would probably consider here as well.
Yeah. And then, of course, Teamer Sabertooth. It's just another one of those, like, Crystal Shard bounces Maelstrom back to your hand and lets you recast it.
And you can hit that off of the Maelstrom off the Cascade trigger.
Yeah.
And be ready to do it again immediately if you happen to be at that point in the game where you have enough mana to do it twice in the turn, which is not crazy in this kind of deck. Yeah, that's disgusting. So overall, Max, what are your thoughts here?
I really like this deck. I always like playing against Maelstrom Wanderer decks because you don't know if they're going to be that chaos deck or like just good stuff, or, you know, maybe they took a really weird turn on it and it's like mono green Maelstrom or something. You know, it's just, they are always fun to play against. Cascade, I think, is a cool mechanic. I would love to play against this deck. I would love to play this deck, like pilot it myself.
I mean, I saw a Maelstrom Wanderer Elemental Tribal deck. I think it was not this year at Vegas, it was the previous year, but like, I've seen that as a tribal commander too. It doesn't do anything for elementals, but like, if you wanted to go that route, that was an option for you.
Yeah.
It's a cool commander. It's also one that, like, once upon a time, 3 or 4 years ago, I saw a lot of, and whether it's because it generated a lot of aggro or just there's been, you know, the new hotness coming out, people have switched over to, it's also a commander I haven't seen for a while, at least that anyone around here or any place I've been has really played. So I like seeing kind of old school commanders like this still out there in the wild getting played.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Zach, thank you very much for supporting us on Patreon and keeping the lights on and keeping the pants on.
Yes. Well, not tonight.
We're
just kidding.
We're recording remotely, so who knows what kind of debauchery is happening in the Dungeon of Doom. We will be back next week with another show on Monday with Chris. We can find out how he did at GP Indy. Our podcast theme is Retro Future Dirty with Kevin MacLeod, licensed via Creative Commons. Our show was edited by Ken Peddle. You can find him on Twitter at LOAD3R. You can find me on Twitter at Dana Roach. You can find Max at CMDR_Max. You can find Chris at WiseSquishy1. Until next time, I'm Dana.
And I'm Max.